Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. Here are your top stories. Are the self-employed prepared for retirement? And careers and caregiving compete for employees' hours. Well, folks, there's a lot of partisan gridlock going on in Washington, D.C., but there's still a lot of great work being done by America's think tanks on the issues of retirement and financial security. Joining me now to discuss this, John Scott. He is the director of the Retirement Savings Project at the Pew Charitable Trust. John, thanks so much for joining us. So, thanks. It's always great to see you and talk with you. And I know there's a lot going on in DC. So, answer the question: Are the self-employed saving enough for retirement?
I think the short answer is it depends. We recently put out a study that compared different kinds of workers, traditional W-2 workers with self-employed, but we divided the self-employed into those that are solo self-employed or just self-employed on their own versus those that might be in a multi-person kind of business. So maybe a self-employed person that has their own company or maybe a law firm or something like that. We thought it was really important to understand that there are different kinds of self-employed. And so we'll get into the details, I think, a little bit, but I think the short takeaway is that those solo self-employeds are struggling a bit financially as they're approaching the end of their careers.
Yeah, and I know you and Pew and others have been at the very top of trying to provide coverage for people. A lot of these people, John, do not have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan like a 401k, a 403b, a governmental 457.
Yeah, no, that's right. They are much less likely to be offered a plan or to have a plan. Even when there is a plan available in some form or fashion, they're less likely to take advantage of it. Now, a lot of these folks are working, part-time or they're partially retired, so they maybe are not generating enough hours. We also looked at the possibility that maybe the worker is self-employed. Mm-hmm. Perhaps they have a spouse that has a traditional job with regular benefits, including healthcare and pensions. And we found that that's somewhat more likely in the case of these solo self-employeds, that they're sort of viewing this as a household approach. But even the spouses aren't saving a great deal more to make up for the shortfall with the self-employed worker.
Do you think some of this is just the natural progression of workers now to this quote unquote, I hate terminology and jargon, but gig economy, right? People, maybe they're taking multiple jobs. They're doing something in the gig economy. Do you think that is kind of that progression for a lot of people now?
I think that could be. I mean, the data really didn't tell us, get into the whys, but I think that's certainly a strong hypothesis that what we could be seeing here. And these are older workers. These are people between the ages of 50 and 64. So you can certainly imagine a possibility where someone has worked for a while, perhaps in a traditional job. They hit their 50s and, they get laid off or something happens. They have to care for a sick spouse. So they pick up self-employment to sort of make ends meet. And so they're sort of doing that kind of thing on the fly as they're approaching retirement. I think that's certainly a possibility that feeds into this broader gig economy narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done a great job, and I think you would agree, because I know you've been right out there at the tip of the spear, so to speak, in terms of getting people to at least be aware of saving. I just think it's really tough for people at all different levels, because when you look at some of the wage numbers are not growing in proportion to even things like inflation. When you're out there talking, and you do a ton of public speaking, I think the audience should know that. People who are not familiar with John and with Pew's work, John does a ton of public speaking on this issue, along with other, what I would call think tanks and people out there talking about policy. I mean, any things that come to mind in terms of solutions, things that maybe advocating may not be the right word, but things you're talking to legislators and others about what we can do to mitigate some of this? Because we're going to come to the end where people are going to be retiring. They're not going to have any money. They're going to be working longer. That impacts younger workers.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think a lot of people think, well, I'll just keep working longer, and they may not be able to, whether they have their own health issue or a loved one, or just the job market is such for older people. It's a little bit tougher. I think the basic approach is, here we're focused on older workers who are self-employed. Maybe we need to strengthen Social Security so that there's a bigger safety net for those folks as they're approaching the end of their work lives. But also, I think it points to the fact that we need to get people saving earlier.
Yeah.
We need to get people into the savings system in their 20s, so they're building up those assets. When they do have those inevitable bumps in their careers, they have to go into self-employment or partial retirement. At least they've built up a nest egg before that time, and not trying to make up at the end of their careers when it's more difficult.
Yeah, and I think that is, I think it's a double-pronged sword, which I hear I'm using a lot of colorful analogies today. My apologies to the audience. I can't think of anything better. But I think I'm not a warlike person, but let me just say that I think what you're advocating for, talking about, is we talk a lot about the buzzword financial literacy. It seems like some of that is happening at the state and the federal government level, so that people at least understand that there is importance to learning how to budget and learning about the importance of saving. That's part number one. Part number two is let's strengthen the existing program, Social Security. Let's keep people having access to a retirement plan. So if they do have money, they can put something away.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I think it is a holistic approach. It's not going to be one particular solution. Financial literacy is not going to solve, these kinds of issues like with the solo self-employed, but it certainly helps. The fact that people don't understand compounding of investment returns over time, which really helps them understand why you want to get into the savings plan earlier in your life to let those returns grow over time. I think that's critical, but I think you have to address it from some of these other angles as well.
Yeah. John, in terms of, and I want to go to commercial break in a minute, but in terms of areas of research that you're looking at Pew, is this top of mind for you? I mean, I know you're routinely updating your existing research. We're going to talk about some other research your colleague did in the next segment. But when you and other organizations like Brookings, Aspen, and others, I mean, is this particular issue the one that's front and center?
Yeah, I would say it is. I think we're always concerned about access and participation to retirement plans. And obviously, there's a big debate about whether this segment of the workforce, gig economy, independent contractors, temps, and the like, whether they're growing or not. I suspect that they are. But it's a large chunk when you add up all those workers. The Uber drivers of the world actually make up a pretty small share, but if we throw in independent contractors and temps and other kinds of non-traditional workers, it's pretty big, and I suspect it's growing, and they really do have a barrier to accessing retirement plans and savings. So I think we need to understand it a little more deeply, and I think all of us who are working on this issue, and including those in the private sector, quite frankly, we're all trying to understand what's the dynamic going on here with this workforce and how can we reach them. Yeah,
and I don't mean to just put it on you or your colleagues at other organizations. I think it's an American issue, and we all need to come together. It's a huge issue, and we need to solve it together. We can't just rely on one group or another. Well, John, I want to go to commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about your colleague Karen's thoughts around the careers and caregiving, because you brought it up earlier in the segment. Real important topic. So will you stick around for a few minutes?
Absolutely.
And when we come back, John's going to stay with us, and we're going to shift gears to talk about how careers and caregiving impact employees' hours. Stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back to the program. You know, many Americans are not only working full or part-time careers, they're also full or part-time caregivers for members of their family. John Scott's still with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about the research that Pew Charitable Trust has done. John, I want to switch gears with you. Your colleague, Karen, she's a research partner with you with the Pew Charitable Trust. She wrote a really interesting piece about the balancing the career with caregiving. Let's talk about that, because you alluded to it in the last segment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's a huge issue. Obviously, it's an outgrowth or a partial outgrowth of our aging population. We see the aging of the baby boomers in huge numbers. And so, you know, caregiving at the end of life, I think the fastest growing segment of the population are people in their 80s. And people in their 80s are 4 times more likely to need some sort of care. And when we talk about care, I think it's important to distinguish or understand there's a lot of variation there, from just getting somebody to a doctor's appointment on occasion, or full-blown care around Alzheimer's and everything in between. And for a lot of folks, this can have a huge impact. Certainly people at the wealthy end of the spectrum have the resources to hire caregivers. People at the other end of the spectrum have Medicaid, but there are a lot of middle-class families in the middle who, they can't afford to pay for care, and they're not poor enough to qualify for Medicaid. So they're really doing this on their own. It's estimated that about 40 million caregivers are out there in the United States today, providing almost $500 billion of care a year. And I think one of the critical things, and sort of getting to your point, is that a lot of these caregivers are working. They work about 35 hours a week, regular jobs, in addition to providing that unpaid care to a loved one or a friend. So it's a big issue. I think it's going to be a growing issue and has, I think, big impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. And the financial strain, as you alluded to, on people, and just to be able to balance, we were talking in the last segment about more and more people being single business owners or sole proprietors. The financial strain, obviously big. And then the lost productivity, which I thought was really interesting when I'm looking at what Karen was talking about in her piece, the lost productivity for workers, people who have to leave a job temporarily to care for a loved one, miss a day of work. That impacts not only the individual, the family, but also the employer.
Yeah, and I think this is a really fascinating issue. There's really not a lot of research on this topic of the financial impacts on both the individual caregiver and on their employer. What little we do know from work that's been done before is that caregivers report a variety of strategies to deal with, balancing a job and caregiving responsibilities, whether that's adjusting their work schedule or turning down a promotion, taking time off, using up all their paid time off, those kinds of things that obviously, are impacting their own bottom line. Mm-hmm. And that in turn, has an effect on their productivity. They're showing up to work tired or exhausted, or they're distracted. There's absenteeism. There's what is my favorite phrase, presenteeism. Yep. Where you're at the job, but you're on the phone with your loved one's doctor or the nursing home, and so that's time that's taken away from your productivity. And so I think employers do see this as an effect, but no one's been able to quantify it to any great degree. I think there's one study that I found that the cost to U.S. businesses is running at about $29 billion a year. Wow. And that's a big number. But again, there's a lot we don't know. And I think this resonates with a lot of employers, but they haven't been able to put a number on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably beyond astronomical when you think about the impact to productivity, to clients, to the work. Let's talk about a little bit, Karen mentions in her piece about flexibility at work, but also the thing that just hit me is, these people are not the only ones. We were talking offline about this, we're all going to go through this in some way, shape, or form with our loved ones, giving some level of care. Even if we have the most resources, there's got to be some level of counseling, or there's groups for divorcees or for different stresses in people's lives. Maybe there's something here that people need to realize, that they're not in this alone, that there are people who have lived through this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think flexible time or time off or some sort of combination is certainly one strategy. But I think the point that I've taken away from all this, from Karen's work, and I should say your name, Karen Kavanaugh,
My apologies.
credit, but that I think we need sort of a holistic solution. It's not just about adjustments to Medicaid or employer policies or paid time off or things like that, but I think a deeper issue. A lot of folks are just confused as to what they need to do, how to navigate different bureaucratic systems to get care for their loved ones. So I think, going back to what you said, it's almost like we need some sort of Sherpa to sort of guide us through these kinds of issues, and whether how to fill out a form or what agency to go through, or how to, how to deal with a doctor or a specialist on some medical issue. I think it's not just about time, but I think it's about just, what do I do? How do I sort of get through this? And I think people really need a lot of help.
Yeah, it's about effectiveness. And I think if you can almost, I'm not saying it has to be an expensive service, but you can, and I'm not saying the government should run it either. I think if you can rely on somebody, we have, for example, and this issue, student loan payoff services, right? That help people refinance and pay off their student loan debt. There are all these different federal programs, and there are services that do that. Why isn't there someone who can be an advocate? And I know the National Council of the Aging has looked into this, and others, but there should be somebody or a group a service that can help navigate people through this, because they would know the best way. And I think that it's important to establish that, but it's also important to know that this is part of life, unfortunately, and we all go through this in some way, shape, or form together, and you're not alone.
Yeah, and I think that's the employers are starting to understand that there's a real cost to this, and that maybe this could be done through the private sector. Maybe there's a service that's incorporated in a company's employee benefits program that provides a little bit more holistic approach or help to employees, so that companies are saving money by doing good at the same time. And maybe, I'm sure that for small employers, especially, that don't have those resources, they barely provide a full suite of employee benefits.
Sure.
Maybe there's a role there for public policy. But I think it really does have to be a partnership with the workers, employers, and public policy to address this. It's a big issue.
It's a very big issue. And you brought up, we've been talking offline a lot about multiple employer plans and association retirement plans, and that is just for retirement benefits. But there could be something where you could have different organizations join together in a similar structure to provide some of these other voluntary or supplemental benefits. Really interesting work, John. Congratulations to you and your colleague. And I'll give her full credit, Karen Kavanaugh from the Pew Charitable Trust. Keep it going. We'll bring you back on the show. Let's keep elevating these issues. Best of luck to you while you're working through all that research. It must be a lot of fun. And we'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks, Jeff. Take care.
Well, folks, that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hey, have a financial topic or someone of interest you think we should interview? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for more news and headlines, visit today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired of the same